As we get into landlording for the first time, one of the things that can be intimidating is the possibility that one day we might have to go through an eviction. So I thought I'd take a minute and just kind of walk through the process and what my experiences have been of managing thousands of units over 20 years in property management. I can tell you that evictions are relatively rare in our company. We only have to evict less than 1% of the tenants that we place in our homes. It's just relatively uncommon. However, it is a fact of life, and as a landlord, the odds are that one day you may have to go through this process. An eviction, to clarify, is not deciding to not renew a lease. An eviction is not a tenant being willing to move out on their own. An eviction isn't even asking a tenant to leave. An eviction is a legal court process that happens when we have exhausted all other efforts to negotiate a reasonable settlement of whatever disagreement might be in effect for a tenant and a property owner. The eviction process starts with turning over a pile of paperwork to our attorney, who then files a motion with the court, which sets a court date. Our attorney appears in court. Neither the landlord nor the property manager have to be present for the initial hearing. If the tenant shows up, which is relatively uncommon, but if the tenant shows up to dispute the eviction, the judge will set the hearing, will set a trial for a later date that we'll have to show up to. More than half of the time, the tenants do not show up to court, and the judge rules in favor of the landlord and sets in motion the process of restoring the property to the landlord. In the event that we do have to go to trial, a few weeks afterwards, we as your property manager would attend court on your behalf, meet with the tenant, meet with the attorney and the judge, and go through the facts of the case. Majority of the time, that results in a judgment favorable to the landlord in our experience, especially when we have been managing the property and have made sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's throughout the tenant's process. Once we have a judgment from the court, they will send that information over to the sheriff's office. We'll schedule a time to meet us at the property and escort the tenant away from the home if they're still there, and remove the property that's in the home out to the curb. All in all, the process from the date that we file the paperwork until we are meeting the sheriff at the house can take anywhere from 60 to 90 days on average. So there is a period of time we just have to wait for the courts to run through their own process. As I mentioned earlier, many times the tenants do not show up for the first hearing. In my experience, the majority of the time, the judge rules in favor of the landlord. So it's a process. It's an administrative process that we have to go through. It costs a little bit of money, it costs a little bit of time, but in most instances, we are able to get a favorable result from the courts. As I mentioned earlier, eviction is our last course. Before we get to going through that process, we will exhaust every other effort to negotiate with the tenant. Sometimes we have to sweeten the deal to incentivize a renter to move, but in the long run, that's going to be less expensive than paying for 2 or 3 months worth of lost rent and attorney's fees and other things that are involved. So we do have many tools in our box that we can use to resolve those kinds of situations. Eviction is the ultimate last ditch that we will use, and when we do them, 99 times out of 100, we have a successful outcome. So not something to be worried about, something to be aware of, something to know how to address when the time comes, but certainly should not be an obstacle in your decision to get into the rental market.